Mile High Tarantulas, Kerberos, Newt's Commander, Gaetan, Frank the Tank, Moon over Miami. Nice. And we got a like spike suggested. We already got a few likes in there, so that's great. I'm glad to see you all here. Tip Top Taylor, welcome. Zero Cool, excellent. Got a good number of folks in here already. 7 likes, 11 people. It's coming along. Glad to see you here. Finn Drennan. Can you keep wild isopods as pests? Or pets, probably you mean? Yes, you can. I have done so. I have kept, collected wild isopods and bred them. For example, my wild type Silisticus convexus and one of the lines of Armadillidium vulgare that I keep now, I collected in the wild. Collected the Silisticus convexus right in my backyard, so can be done. Let's see. Bugman, Ike for y'all. Like has been spiked, yep. Brant's Pet Paradise. Invertebrats, hello. Thoropods. That one plant guy. Pepe Arando, Fishaholic. Christine Carignan, excellent. Sandy Sizemore's in the house. Frizzy Ketchup. Dark Fries. And Brant's Pet Paradise, I'm doing well. Glad to see you all here. I actually have some Patreon questions I want to address quickly. Early on in the stream, I want to address those so it's easy for patrons to find them. So just refreshing here to make sure I didn't get any additional questions. Would hate to miss them. But it looks like, okay, so here's the question I'm going to answer. This is for Emma. This is my newest patron. Emma joined in today as a patron on Patreon. So thank you, Emma, for doing that. And, wait. Emma joined, I think, yesterday or Saturday, recently, this weekend, something like that. Sorry, I'm screwing it up. Actually, we had another patron just join today, so I was a little confused. But anyway, Emma's been a patron for not very long. There's a new patron, and sorry I messed that up. Anyway, so Emma had a question about Porcellio flavimarginatus, wants to know how to find it. And I would say to Emma that if you're in the US, you can find them at Smug Bug. I'm trying to remember where you're from, Emma. Are you in Canada? If that's the case, I think Reptiliatus has them. Pretty sure he has Flavomarginatus. So do you watch Reptiliatus? I'm pretty sure he has some. I would try reaching out to him and see if you're in Canada. So, because I just don't remember exactly where. So in the US, try Smugbug. In Canada, check with Reptiliatus. Hopefully that helps. And I really appreciate your question. And let's see, Brandon Scott, Devil's Dandruff. And let's see, great. So Devil's Dandruff wanted to know if I have bred these Porcellionis Oreo crumbles with another type. I'm starting. Here is Porcellio pruinosus orange crossed with Oreo crumbles. It should work. People have done it before. I wouldn't be the first one to do it, so it should work just fine. I think half a dozen young orange individuals, you can see one in the corner there, and half a dozen young Oreo crumbles, and that should work eventually. I'm going to have to do some separation and so on, but we'll get there. Okay. So for the ones as pets, can you use isopods you use as pets? Can you use soil and wood from outside? You can. You might get some pests in there, but it's possible to do. What's my dream isopod that I don't keep currently? So many. One that comes to mind instantly is Marullinella tricolor. Very beautiful isopod from Southeast Asia. And I don't have it, and I can't keep it until I get a permit to have it shipped to me. And that's probably going to be a while because I don't think they're permitting that species yet. So we'll see. But I'm excited about that. But there are so many others that I don't have yet. Porcelio Hazai, the giant, or the Porcelio Hazai High Yellow is another one I don't have a permit for yet. Many of the Cubaris are awesome, and I don't have those yet. Oh, so Emma is in the stream, and I can finish answering your question. Great. How do I find caring for Porcelio flavimarginatus? So far, I haven't really had them for very long. I've only had them a little less than a month. And so far, most of them are doing great. I think I lost one shortly after getting them. But they seem to be doing fine. Not breeding yet, but it's only been about a month, so I'm going to give them a little bit more time. But they do like to climb, and they do need a place to dry off, and they do need some decent ventilation. So I know that, but other than that, I'm so new into them because I've only had them for about a month that I don't know that I can give a whole lot more specific information, but hopefully that helps. And Mr. and Mrs. Morelia, welcome. Eileen O'Donnell, see you here too. Oh yeah, I totally love this species, so I can see why you'd love this species too. I also have the whiteout morph of this species and love that one as well. J-Man's in the house, nice to see you here. Brian Orr, Crystal's Pets and Plants. So the first generation of crossing the orange and the Oreo crumbles are going to be wild types. But then if I cross those wild types with each other, because they'll be double het for orange and Oreo, some of those will be orange Oreos. So they're sometimes called orange cream, because I know Kyle Candillian at Roach Crossing has already done this, and there are probably others that have done it too. And what you get is orange cream. So the dark color in the Oreos is replaced with orange. All right. So no worries, Emma. Sorry, I'm glad that you were in the stream and I was able to answer your question. So that one, Plant Guy, Armadillidium parace. Okay, from Wally recently. Any tips on how to keep them? I have not kept that species. I don't know much about that species. I know a little because I've read about it, but I don't know really enough because I haven't kept it. So Christine Carignan, you've kept dwarf whites and giant canyons in with your chameleons. Okay, those are pretty easy. What other species have you tried? So Finn, yeah, I love my rubber duckies. They're fun.
Did you start watering potatoes?
I did.
Oh.
Yes, I believe.
Okay.
I did. Okay. So here are, I don't know, you can mostly see springtails on the fish food right now. This is my rubber ducky and from Tarantula Cribs. Let's see. It's going to be hard to show you without taking the lid off and changing the angle of the camera. My rubber duckies are breeding. I'm enjoying them. So, yeah. And I think I want to get this underway. I want to keep the chat going too. But so Jason Tran, how can you easily tell the difference between Oreo crumble and dairy cow isopods? Oh, yeah, they do look a little bit similar, especially the young dairy cows with the Oreo crumbles. I would say when they're kept in slightly drier conditions, one thing is that you'll see kind of a sheen, a velvety sheen on the Porcelionides prenosus, the Oreo crumbles. Their body shape is actually very different. They're very much thinner. So I think there are many other differences that you could look at too. I mean, there are things like articulation points on the flagellum of the antenna that varies in a lot of different species and so on. So there are things you can look at, but I would say, first of all, if you look for that sheen and you also look for the fact that the dairy cows are much stockier, wider, heavier set, that would make, I think that will help a lot. They also tend to be a little slower, not a lot slower, but a little slower in their movements. Just as some basic differences. So I figured what I'm going to do now is, yes, the all caps does help me notice the questions. If you have specific questions, you're not just chatting. So thank you, Ken, for mentioning that. Where is Ken's name? There he is. Okay. Orange Oreo cookies come out every fall. True. Orange Oreo, I kind of like that name. It's sort of bouncy. Orange Oreo for the isopods. So Porcelia spinicornis, I've read about it, but I've never kept that species. That's cool that you have one, though. I've heard that they can be a little bit tricky, and that I think Oren McMonigal says, I'm going to start the rehousing here as we're talking. Oren McMonigal says that they're a good species to kind of get your feet wet with if you want to try to keep some of the large Spanish Porcelia. I think I'm going to put a little bit more substrate in there, but just taking it slow here. So EchoBod, question about Peacekeeper, getting mixed answers on this. Do you know where the Peacekeeper gene comes from? Well, my understanding, and I could be wrong, this is my recollection. Back in the day, a long time ago, a number of years ago, on dendroboards, I think it was, Alan Gross was communicating about, he was trying to produce orange Dalmatians. We were having a discussion on that on dendroboard, and I ended up trying to produce some and did produce some, but I was not the first. Ryan Orr was the first one to do it, but Alan Gross was another one who was replicating that morph. And I think some of the ones that he was working with turned out to be orange kois, if I recall correctly. I'm just putting in some oak sawdust now in the soil here, in the substrate. It's organic compost and organic potting soil mixed with that oak sawdust. Okay. Let's see. I could be wrong about that, but that's my recollection. So Zero Cool, how often do you change the water in a springtail colony with charcoal and water? Hardly ever, honestly. I go months and months before I do that. If I notice there's a problem with the springtail colony, I might do something. I just put a little crushed eggshell in here. May not be strictly necessary since isopods do get calcium from their diet, and they do need calcium in their diet. There's absolutely no question about that. They need calcium in their diet. Their exoskeleton contains significant amounts of calcium, so they need it, but they do get it from their diet. So it might not be strictly necessarily to add to the substrate, but it doesn't hurt, and it might help with pH buffering in the substrate. So that one plant guy, I don't have any isolated Porcelia scaber white. I do have white ones showing up in my morph mix and some showing up in my Dalmatians, but I don't have any, excuse me, isolated ones. And there are a couple of different strains. There's the whiteout, and then there's the leucistic ones. So my day's been busy, but I've been looking forward to the live stream. It's a fun part of my day. Raptor Bro, what do you think about mealworms as cleanup crews, and how would they compare with isopods? In some setups they work pretty well. I've used them in my leopard gecko enclosure to some extent, and they do seem to work, although I prefer superworms because the beetles are really good poop eaters. So if you're doing a semi-arid or an arid cleanup crew, mealworms and superworms can work pretty well. I think isopods it's with my leopard gecko, I actually keep superworms and isopods, and I think that's better than just using either one. I would say, how do they compare? Hard to say. I guess they don't seem as prolific. If you put a dozen or 2 dozen mealworms in an enclosure, you're not necessarily going to see them reproduce quite as much. And I think that's partly because of the fact that in my particular setup, the leopard gecko is going to be eating some of them, more than it would eat the isopods. So there's that. Hopefully that helps. So, zebras, clowns, and powder orange. So yeah, the dwarf whites really do well in the dwarf in with dart frogs. That's true. I've seen that, Christine. So those are the ones that aren't working for you. What exactly do they do? Do they just die off, or? That one plant guy. Congrats on the powder orange is breeding. The same isopod. It just depends on the species. You get some husbandry differences based on species, but yes, other than that, essentially the same. You will get fact that, you know, some wild isopod populations are going to be a little bit more sensitive to temperature and things like that. For example, Oniscus ocelus or Poselioscaber wild types may be more sensitive to heat than the ones that have been in captive care for a number of generations. So Brian, I'm not sure if P. spinicornis is Spanish originally. It is an adventive, in other words, it's not native to the US, but I'm not sure where it originally started. But European for sure. So frizzy ketchup, any tips on snails? It would depend on the species. I have had quite a number of different species of snails, but their care differs widely, and a lot of the ones I've raised have been aquatic, so there's that. Hickory hardwood pellets should be fine. I've used hickory. Hickory chips. So the science layer, the fish food, the fish food pellets that I give them, because it has ground up fish in it, has this calcium from their skeletons, so there's quite a bit in there. And also leaves. A lot of the dried leaves have calcium in them. Millipede care. The main difference that I've noticed is that millipedes need a deeper substrate because of the way they molt. Important. Another big difference is that they seem, the rotted wood component of their diet seems to be more important. It's good for both of them, but millipedes seem to need it a lot more than the others. So newt, good question. We're named that isopod today. We will see. We'll see what we get through. So this enclosure from Tarantula Cribs, I love it. I've been keeping these in here for since October, I guess. The beginning of October. And as you can see, even though there's a lot of ventilation in here, I'm not having issues with fungus gnats in here. You know, there might be the odd one in there occasionally, but it's not a big deal. And I love this enclosure. The only reason I'm moving them out of this enclosure is because the population has increased so much in here, they're outgrowing it. And so that's it. There's no other reason. If this were a bigger enclosure, I would keep them in there forever, because I love the fact that I can watch them in there. I love this enclosure and can't say enough good things about this enclosure. Sorry about the jiggling as I readjust the camera. I want to make sure you get a good look at what I'm doing here, and I'm going to aim it down as I start moving things. So here we go. I'm going to put this right up against here so I don't lose anything, hopefully. And I'm going to start by moving the moss. And I'll be watching the chat as much as I can as I do that. So I can answer the chat. Oh, fumes, Christine? Fumes. Could very well be. Fumes are not good for isopods. That could very well be an issue that you're encountering. Oh, I'm going to be careful and moss on the drier side with less. I don't bother to check, and then I notice later that I have put with more ventilation, which, you know, you can do it, but it's not the most efficient to conserve moisture in the moss, and the moss is there mostly to conserve moisture as a hydration station. So might as well, you know, do what you can to maintain that. You can start to see some isopods crawling around in there. I'm going to set this one down temporarily on the moss. That's not going to stay there. Let's see, look at all those little guys in there. They're doing really well. I started out with around 20. There was a little bit of an overcount, so it's probably a little more than that. But I estimate there are well over 100 in here now. And a lot of them are young, but a lot of them are nearly full grown. They grow fast. It's been really cool. Like I said, absolutely the only reason I am changing these over is because there's just not enough space for them all. A dairy cow wall. I mean, you just want to look in my dairy cow enclosure and see them just like solid dairy cows everywhere. Might be able to do that. And ones, best meal for springtails. Well, a good one to start with is brewer's yeast or nutritional yeast as a base dietary item. I like to add a few things to it. I like to add a little calcium. I like to add a little spirulina to it. And it is great stuff. They really grow on that. Sometimes I add some some green pea flower too. To that, usually do. So they're doing pretty well in here. So is it stressful for millipedes when they're handled? I think they do become more habituated to it over time, like you're mentioning. I see that happening. I think if you never handle them hardly at all and then you do, that is kind of stressful, but if they get used to it, I don't think it's as bad. So Finn, I would recommend both of them. I like both of the enclosures, both the Isoviva. I'm just going to dump this because it's the most efficient way to do it. Shouldn't hurt the isopods any. Now I'm just going to go through, make sure I get any stragglers. Okay. Just double checking here. I think I got all the iPods. There's a couple of springtails and some soil in there. I'll go through that more thoroughly a little later. But they're doing well. Let's zoom in a little bit here so you can see those Oreo crumbles doing their thing. Love these guys. Okay, so I would recommend both enclosures. No problem, used them both, like them both. And yeah, no reservations about those enclosures. They're great. All right, so I'm just going to mix this part up a little bit because there's kind of the leaf litter. You know, we want to mix it a little bit into the substrate without hurting the little isopods. These are kind of a sensitive isopod as far as handling goes. You don't want to handle them directly. They can be crushed very easily. You can keep a colony in a 5-gallon tank of most species pretty permanently. You just have to make sure it's not a super prolific species that will, breed crazily. I wouldn't do it with dairy cows, for example. I probably would do it with powder blues or any cultivar thereof because they're just a lot smaller, so you can have a larger number in a small container like that. I wouldn't worry about that as much. Yeah, 5-gallon will work for most. Just make sure it's ventilated properly for whatever species you're keeping in there. And Echo Bade, when would you suggest upgrading isopods to a larger enclosure? I started with 12 and a 6 quart and have about 2 groups of babies. I think you're good till you have a few hundred in there. When you notice they're eating all the leaf litter in about a week and they're just everywhere, then I would consider switching them over. Look at those beauties. Love these. Love the contrast on them. Okay, I'm going to move the, oh, there's a ton of them. The babies too. Sorry, it's a little bit out of focus when that zoomed in. I put this right here, and I'm going to see if I have another piece of cork bark over here. Put in there with them. Yeah, I do. That's about right. Another piece. I think I'm going to put this one kind of on the line there. Put this one. Well, that one may be actually a little bit too tall. I don't want it too tall because I don't want them climbing out. I'll try to find a piece that's closer to the ground. This one looks better. I'm going to move that one right there, I think. Put this one here. Yes, closer to the ground and further away from the ventilation holes. Hello, Cullen and my little sea isopods in the way. Specific requirements for their culture. That again, because it's a Cubaris species, I don't have it. I only have Cubaris species that I either got locally in the state or had before my permits, before I knew about permits, because I can't really cross state lines with them until I have permits. So I don't have that species yet. Let's see. So that one plant guy, I think Peace Gabers have bigger brood sizes than powder oranges. I'm not exactly sure on the exact numbers, but powder oranges have really small brood sizes, but they have them often and they grow fast. And Porcellus Gaber has larger brood sizes. Small millipedes I'd recommend for beginners. I would say a great species to recommend for beginners would be, and I'm going to lower this down so you can get a better look here at what's going on. Let's see, that's a little better, huh? Let's try that. Would be the bumblebee millipede. That is a great species. I have those. You just need to make sure that your temperature is at least 72 Fahrenheit and not too hot, but 72 and anywhere in the 70s, and I'm sure in Ireland you have to convert that to Celsius, but 72 Fahrenheit or above, slightly above, and they live for a couple of years and they breed really well, so that's a great one. Could you get amphipods in Texas? Yeah, Hyalella azteca can be shipped around the country without regulation by APHIS, so they're pretty easy to get. And they probably would breed in your 10-gallon planted tank as long as something's not eating them. So if you want to get them established, I would make sure there are plenty of, if you have some fine substrate in there, you have decor they can hide under, put them in before you put the fish in, get them breeding, and then put the fish in before they eat all your plants. Because if you don't take care of that, they will. Is that a little bit out of focus? It kind of feels like it is. Let's see. So Eileen O'Donnell, do you ever find isopods that just die from old age or natural causes? Yeah, I do find that. And generally, though, in the more established cultures, they just get eaten before I notice, because they will eat the dead ones. So, but I do see it sometimes. So Cullen, the largest beetle that I currently keep, and a beetle that likes a humid environment to some degree, is the cottonwood stag beetle, which is local. You can collect it here, and I did collect some adults last summer and have some larvae that they produced. They laid eggs, and I'm raising up those larvae, so I'm kind of excited about that. Something I had never done before was raise stag beetles. So cottonwood stag beetles, like I said, very different from some of the other stag beetles. They're not quite as dramatically large as some. They're pretty big though, and the males are not quite as dimorphic as some, but they're pretty fantastic. Yeah, I did do a live stream on those in July. If you want to go back and find it, you can. I've shown them a couple other times on the channel. I think last week I showed one of the larvae. So Science Lair, Narcissus americanus is a good species too. There's nothing wrong with that. I also recommend ivory millipedes. So stuck in the lazy corner again. When I first got my zebra isopods, I think I got them in July. They didn't breed until November, and then I couldn't stop them, and now I have thousands. So that's not unusual when you first get a colony for them to kind of, certain species, I mean this species was breeding within a month or so, but it just depends on the species. Sometimes when I got my giant canyons, there were monkai running around in the shipping material, so that happens too. And I think the same thing happened with my orange vigor, Armadillidium bulgari. Stelliferous oofer. Have I ever had dreams of bugs crawling on me? Maybe. Zero cool. I have not been shipping the bumblebee millipedes because I'm not sure what the regulations on shipping them are, so I need to find that out. I do know that I can ship Hiltonius pulchris, and I have, because I checked, and I can ship those without regulation. Stelliferous oofer, there also are diseases and parasites isopods can get. One of the, two things they can get. One is iridovirus, which changes their color but tends to kill them over time. And it does kill them over time. It's just not mince words here. And then the parasites, one of the parasites they can get are nematodes. There are parasitic nematodes that can kill them as well. But I don't know of all of the parasites. I've never dealt with isopods that have been diagnosed with parasites. That doesn't mean I've never had any that had any, but I'm going to see if they'll come to the fish food. Okay. So Eileen, next question, what do you do with the dead ones? Just leave them to be eaten. Basically, I don't usually notice them until they've already been eaten, but yeah, usually, if I do notice them, I usually leave them to be eaten. Sometimes I'll take them out, it depends on the situation. So, for arid isopods and springtails, none of the, well, I won't say none of them, but there are very few isopods in the hobby, very few springtails in the hobby that don't need a moist area to hang out in. But there are springtails and isopods that'll do better in an arid setup as long as they have a moist hide area. Giant canyons are one. Porcelionides prenosus, this species here, will do well. I have these in with my leopard gecko, this species in with my leopard gecko. And there are springtails in there too, and they do fine because there are microclimates inside the enclosure where they can get the moisture they need when they need it. So if you are looking for some to put in an arid enclosure, this is a good species for it. It doesn't have to be the Oreo crumbles. It could be the powder oranges, powder blues, whiteouts. I'd put powder blues, powder oranges, and whiteouts all together in with my leopard gecko, since they're all the same species and they're interbreeding. It's fun. So Eileen, if that's the first dead one that you found, you're probably okay if it's a year old. I wouldn't worry about it too much. You're probably good. And thanks for joining in, Stuck in the Lazy Corner. So the science lair, plants to keep with millipedes. You know, I've never really tried that. I know people do it successfully. I would say ivory millipedes are pretty active in the daytime, pretty surface active, and they shouldn't damage plants too much as long as they have enough food. So that could be an option. So Ken, they would be crunchy, especially Dave would be excessively crunchy. So that's my guess. And if you have spots of sphagnum moss for the isopods and to help your Leo shed, and maybe cover that with some cork bark, you should be good to go. Just keep it damp, and yeah, that should help. And thanks for joining in, Frank. Appreciate it. So Mark C. Lemon, or however you say your name. Thoughts on isopod communication? Well, there's some interesting things going on there. You can see that when isopods interact, it is generally in their antennae will tap together. I'm not sure what they're actually communicating, but they do seem to do it a lot. They'll also engage in wrestling matches over food, so there's a form of communication going on there. There's also the fact that the males, for some species, will actually battle for mating rights with the females. One good example of that is the species Porcelio expansus, the sometimes called the Beetlejuice isopod or the dragon, like the yellow dragon isopod. So yeah, there is some communication going on. There's also a desert species. I can't remember the name of the desert species right now, but the particular species engages in parental care and cooperative burrow digging, and the parents will take turns taking care of the babies in the burrow and going out and foraging for food. If they find baby isopods of their same species but not their own offspring, they will eat them, which is crazy. They will take care of their own babies, but they'll eat the other ones. So some interesting things going on there. So that one plant guy, which species are you talking about getting established in your tank? Because you wouldn't necessarily have to get 100. You could start out with a smaller number and have them grow up probably. So I don't have any isopod species from Malaysia myself, but I may have species that also occur in Malaysia, but I don't have any species that are endemic to Malaysia. So the science lair, I don't have any ants currently. I have had ants. I do have some velvet ants, which are of course wasps, but I don't have any true ants. But I have kept them before. I do enjoy them. I had an ant farm that I started with wild collected queens some years ago. We're talking approximately 20 years ago when I started that colony, and had it for several years, so that was fun. I enjoy the complex behavior of ants. They're quite fascinating. So here, I've got a question for you. I moved my isopods into this, of course, took them out of this tarantula cribs enclosure. I can't put a tarantula in there because I'm not allowed to keep tarantulas, but I have some ideas. One is I might upgrade my rubber duckies, which are living in a smaller version of the tarantula crib enclosure, and their population is growing, so I might move those in here. But I've also thought of putting a Scolopendra polymorpha in here because these enclosures are excellent for keeping centipedes contained, and that's hard to do. You can't often find a ready-made enclosure that's already good enough for keeping centipedes in. And that one plant guy, it might work. If you let them go at night, feed the guppies heavily beforehand, you might be able to get them in there. So Cullen, I don't have any Marullinella species at all. And I don't plan to get any until I can get a permit for them. But I would love to keep them someday when I do have a permit. That one plant guy. Yeah, Hyalella azteca. You could try that. I've had them survive in small quantities in with live bearers and things like that. You just need to make sure, like you said, we've got hides. I even have them do well with goldfish. As long as there's decor for them to hide under, they tend to breed under there and they'll come out at night and stuff. What I used to do with one of my goldfish tanks when I lived in Hawaii and had a goldfish tank there, I would take, when I did water changes, the gravel vac, which was hooked up to a python, would pull the scuds out of the amphipods out of the gravel. So I'd lift up decor, suck out some of the gunk, and it would suck up the amphipods, but not enough that they would go down the drain. It would just suck them up into the tube, and then I would hold that out in front of my goldfish, and the scuds would swim out, and the goldfish would come in and eat them. So that was one way I gave my goldfish a little snack. So Kerberos, what in your opinion is the most surface active isopod? Well, I would say that dairy cows are certainly up there. Dairy cows are definitely up there. And this species, Porcelionides pruinos, is pretty surface active. Porcellia ornatus is pretty surface active as well. And yeah, I would say those are some of my top options for surface active isopods. I'm going to actually we're going to look at some of those I just talked about. This is a very old bin here. I just keep it here when I'm changing out things. Let me put these guys in their new home, and I'm going to get some of the ones I was just talking about. So this is one of my favored species. I really like these a lot. This is Porcellia ornatus, and I just have 3 morphs of them. One of them very, very recent. One of them yes, the science layer, I should have clarified. Like, give them a good feeding, let them sit, because you don't want them in a feeding frenzy when you feed them. Yes, that is true. So let's take a look. There's only a couple of the young ones, the Porcellia ornatus high yellow here. I was just showing someone a little while ago. There's a ton of them right there. See how the adults are much more yellow than the offspring? All the younger, duller yellow ones were born here, and the older adults have the much more rich yellow coloration. They tend to do that. They're almost fully grown before they start getting the colors. So Forest Oasis, would you consider playing plant cutting zoophila and isopods for 3 sleeper elephant beetle larvae? I'll have to look into what I can do permit-wise with that. I would consider it, but I just have to check permit-wise. See if that's an option. And Newt. Well, she wasn't entirely excited about the centipedes when I first started keeping them, but they've never escaped, so she's comfortable with that. And our agreement was no tarantulas, nothing with medically significant venom, and no roaches. So everything else is on the table. So that's how it works. And I've never had a centipede escape. Never been bitten by one that was in my captive care. I did get bitten a couple times as a kid, but not too worried about that. I wouldn't keep any that were, crazily toxic. Medically significant, definitely not. See, this one on the right of the little piece of wood here, starting to get the yellow. It's a little bit bigger than these others with the duller yellow in it, so that's cool. You can see it's the transition going on. I'm not sure if that one was born here, if I already had that one when I originally got these. I originally got some in June and then got some more in October. None under that piece. Very cool species. Really like it. And they tend to be day active, but this colony is fairly new, so they're not terribly day active yet. So you're not seeing a whole lot going on. But I do have some other individuals of that species that are crazily day active. Let's see if I can get those set up as I'm checking this out. Checking the chat. Species of isopod I'd never keep. Well, define never, I guess. If you mean species that I would just never be interested in keeping at all, ever, assuming that I have the legal clearance to do so, I don't know that there's any isopod species I wouldn't keep as long as I could, contribute to the hobby. Like, there's a species from the island of St. Helena that's extremely rare and feeds upon things like fern spores. And I'm not too excited about keeping that one because I'd rather, have them preserved in the wild, and they seem pretty difficult to keep. But if someone were to crack the code on keeping them in captive care and said, hey Russ, I want to give you a chance to help this species survive in a captive breeding program, here are some individuals, then I'd totally do it. But if somebody said, these don't breed very well in captivity, don't breed at all in captivity, do you want some? Then I would say no. But right now I think they're completely legal to get, so it's a non-issue, but hopefully that kind of helps. So Emma, yeah, they are a little bit steep in price, the Flavomarginatus, but they're very cool. Very cool. So J-Man, thanks again for the Porcelia ornatus high yellow. Love those things. So Grillidae, Paracacal, asking now, instead of just watching your video, would you recommend buying from Bugs in Cyberspace? Totally. I have both purchased bugs from Bugs in Cyberspace, traded bugs from with Bugs in Cyberspace, and received bugs as a gift from Bugs in Cyberspace. I would totally recommend him. He knows what he's doing. He has extensive experience. He has, an amazing collection. He's a great guy to work with. Bugs in Cyberspace is amazing, is the way to put it. He is fantastic. So yes, totally work with Peter. Totally buy things from Peter. No red runners. Yeah, I mean, red runners are kind of scary. I've heard of horror stories of those infesting people's houses, but I don't think I've ever heard stories of like dubias infesting people's houses. So, can I use shrimp supplement for isopods, meaning feeding them shrimp, or meaning a supplement that is intended for shrimp consumption? Which one do you mean? So, the science layer, some species don't need much ventilation, and some species tend to need more. So here's some shrimp, dried shrimp. These are dried river shrimp sold for use as turtle and fish food. Let's see what these are, Porcelia ornatus yellow dots do with it. They're going after it already. Huh, Company Renarium. I have not heard of that one, Christine, but maybe I should check it out. Now that's a good point. When, for example, the 6-quart Sterilite tubs, even without having any holes cut into them, already have ventilation because they're not airtight seals. And that may be so in your container. Because, for example, my dwarf whites, I don't give them ventilation beyond the natural ventilation around the edges of the lid, and some other species too. They don't need it. And I agree, Ken, Bugs in Cyberspace is awesome. I'm glad to hear that a lot of other people are having great experiences with Peter at Bugs in Cyberspace like I have. I'm not surprised, but it's just nice that everybody is, feels the same way that I do. So Eddie Young, which species may be next to explode in the hobby? Good question. Well, I think roaches are getting more popular for sure. Millipedes too. So Grillidae, you mean besides mealworms and superworms and peanut beetles and things like that? Confused flower beetles? Oh, supplements for simp using for isopods. Yeah, I guess you could see what's in them. If it's just minerals, it's probably fine. Or if you're talking like the one plant guy, shrimp foods, the isopods would probably go nuts over shrimp foods, yeah. And newt, yeah, I think that's the consensus with dubias is they're deregulated on, APHIS has deregulated them as a species that, is regulated about shipping across state lines. You can ship it across state lines, so I think the potential for infestation as far as they're concerned is pretty low. So lily, the species of springtail that I keep in my Leo tanks, is it different? I like to put Sinella curviceta in arid tanks. I can't remember what species I put in there and what's in there now, but that's the species I tend to favor for more arid tanks with more ventilation. They just seem to tolerate that better. And Sandy, you like bugs in cyberspace as well. Awesome. Me too. So Christina, I'm going to have to look into Renarium. I like Rapacian. I usually use it, but I'm going to have to check this out. Arthropod ambassadors. He gave you a huntsman. Those are amazing. I can't keep them because my wife would, it's too close to a tarantula in her mind. I know she wouldn't go for it, but they're pretty amazing. I used to see them in Hawaii. Axolotls, could be. We've had an axolotl for years. I like axolotls. We're actually going to do a build for my daughter's axolotl. Originally, it's still in a 10-gallon tank. It needs to be in a bigger tank, so we're doubling the tank size. Dark fries. Snails increasing in popularity. Interesting. So Sandy Sizemore Aphis is the, I always get the, it's Agricultural Plant Health Inspection Station. It's part of the USDA. And they are the ones who give me my isopod permits. They regulate the movement of plants, plant pests, and pathogens and so on across state lines. So that is who they are. And so the fact that they don't regulate things like dubia roaches is just kind of a good sign that they've researched it and don't think they're very high. There's a lot of likelihood that they will cause issues with agriculture or causing other pestiferous issues. Arthropods specialized to live in peat bogs. Not that I can think of right now. I know that there are some shrimp that are adapted to living in water with fairly low pH and low dissolved minerals, but yeah, peat bog specifically, I'm not sure. Columbula is the best type of isopod? How? Say it. Columbula? Like Springtail? Forest Oasis, what do you think your next reptile will be, Russ? Well, I would love a pair of emerald tree skinks because I've met Clint's. I had the occasion to visit Clint's emerald tree skinks a couple of times at Clint's Reptiles. They are fantastic, so personable. I don't think I've ever met a reptile more personable than those emerald tree skinks. So absolutely adore those. Would love a pair of those. I don't have the wherewithal to get any right now. I don't have a place to put them, but I do love them a lot and hope to get some someday and breed them. I do have actually a snake enclosure that would not be suitable for emerald tree skinks, but it's an empty snake enclosure, and I have my eyes on some different species. Black African house snake is up there. I might do that. They're fantastic. Biggest species of Armadillidium? I'm not entirely sure. There's a lot that are touted as very large, but I'm not sure. So Eddie, very good question. So 3 of your 4 kids like the hobby. I think all of my kids like animals a lot, and feel more comfortable with animals around. I think that's very fair to say, and that any of them without animals around would feel the lack of them and be uncomfortable, honestly. And they've mentioned that. All of them have had or have right now their own pet. One of my daughters has an axolotl and a leopard gecko. One of my daughters has an aquarium with some shrimp and some coolie loaches in it and her own isopod colony. One of my sons has a snake that is his. My other son had a centipede that was his, and they've all had pet rats. And my daughter, who has the aquarium, also has a budgie, the bird. And so they all enjoy creatures, various types. Not all of them are as into invertebrates as I am, but all of them appreciate invertebrates to some degree, probably more than your average person. I think my oldest son is probably, and my youngest daughter are probably the ones more into invertebrates than the other 2, maybe. The biggest species of isopod in general, I think, is Bathynomus giganteus, the deep sea isopod. That genus is full of big ones, but the giganteus is the biggest. So Cullen, I don't actually have any Frontirostre. So Sandy, I can't blame you. They are so awesome. So maybe someday, if Clints have babies, I will purchase some of those. Collembola culture. It is fun to say. Totally get that. Horned dragon or dwarf chameleon, very cool species. And I love red-eyed crocodile skinks. They're very cool too. I love the fact that they're live-bearing and that they're communal in live-bearing. That's fantastic. And that you can keep them in bioactive vivaria that are similar to a setup for a dart frog, also cool. So that one plant guy, stocky Armadillidium. Gestroy are very stocky, I would say, one of the stockiest. Granulatum too. Jason Schulzenberg, hello and welcome. Oh, Tip Top Taylor, I love that idea. Fairy garden materials to make a magic potion enclosure. Very cool. J-Man and Jason, love it. Science Lair, I have grown carnivorous plants, both Venus flytraps and sundews. Drosera capensis was the sundew species that I grew, and I liked it a lot. Science Lair, I have had aquatic isopod species. Actually, the first species I kept and bred was an aquatic species that I found locally, collected it in an irrigation canal, and put it in a tank that essentially needed to cycle. And I put those in there with some snails, and they were growing and breeding for quite a while. This was, 30-something years ago. Later, I got into marine aquaria and had lots of different types of small marine isopods in there because you can almost not help it. You put some live rock in there and you'll get lots of isopods. So I've done that too. But I haven't kept them in a while. It's been some years since I've had a saltwater aquarium, and I haven't had an aquatic isopod since then. Kerberos. Oh, vinegaroons are awesome. Drosera sessifolia, so close to producing seeds. That's awesome. What is best recipes for isopod chow? Well, I usually don't mix my own. I usually use things like fish food. I use Supreme Isopod Chow, Rapashi Bug Burger, different recipes. Finger Lakes Feeders produce one that I'm going to be trying out soon. So gold tortoise beetles, that sounds awesome. I've never kept those. Yes, Jason, I knew that you were J-Man's cousin. I remember that, and that you guys were doing that. So I thought that was very cool. How's your peppermint shrimp and wrasse doing? So Christine Karinian, would a Venus flytrap help with fungus gnats? Not sure. I generally keep my Venus flytraps outside when I've kept them because they just do better. you know, I'll put them in the fridge to when it's time for them to be dormant, but it's hard to keep a Venus flytrap alive indoors indefinitely. I'm not saying people can't do it, but it's hard, so I haven't tried. Awesome, Jason, that's great. Shrimp and the snails went to cleaning. Excellent. I love the fact that the peppermint shrimp eat the Aptasia anemones, because it's hard not to have Aptasia anemones in an aquarium if you put in live rock, but the peppermint shrimp are pretty good at taking care of it. What size is your tank, by the way? So that one plant guy, common garden snails in your isopod bins. I don't know, you'll get differences of opinion there over whether the isopods bother the snails bother the isopods. Some people keep them together just fine. So hard to say. Partly depends on the species you're putting together. And Drosera capensis, I really love that plant. And that one did eat some fungus gnats for me when I had it, if I recall correctly. I've heard butterworts are good for fungus gnats too. Okay, so Jason, the peppermint shrimp were eating the diatoms off the snails. That's cool. 20 gallon long. So one peppermint shrimp is probably sufficient then. That makes sense. One or two is just fine. Philip Maragno. Maragno? How do you say your name? 10 Gallon Zoo. So my channel, 10 Gallon Zoo, I have another channel called 10 Gallon Zoo, but I haven't done anything with it literally in years. It's just been sitting there. I originally was going to do 2 channels, and that was going to be my invertebrate channel, and this was going to be my fish channel. But I just made this into my everything channel and done a lot of stuff with invertebrates on it, and that's kind of where it's gone. So, and thank you, Science Lair, for joining in. I guess I need to go pretty soon. I got about 3 minutes, so if anybody else has questions or comments, we can cover those. I guess I was able to cover the question from Emma, which is great. Just checking to see if we got any more. Nope, looks good. I think we covered everything on that front. All right. As you can see, and thank you, Philip. And that one plant guy, as you can see, this is a very good surface active species. They're under bright light and they don't care at all. They're just doing their thing, eating their shrimp. So Eddie, good question. I think part of the deal is I have, worked in various fields where I'm giving presentations, working with groups of people in educational settings, various types. So I think that helps. I think I still need to develop that skill quite a bit, but I have had some practice. And thank you, Ken, and Cullen, and Kerberos. And Science Lair, that's really the key, isn't it? Research. Research makes such a difference in everything. In husbandry, it makes a huge difference. And you're welcome, Christine. Thank you for joining in. Oh, look at that, that Porcelia ornatus. He's running away with that little shrimp. Love that. Fun to watch. I think this is a really underrated species, by the way. Porcelia ornatus, you want a surface active species. Porcelia ornatus yellow dot's pretty cheap because it's not flashy, but it's active. So, fun one. All right, well, we got about 30 seconds, so just keep watching the channel. I had some good news I wanted to share with you, but it looks like I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to do that later. But it is good news relating to springtails. So if there's a lot of mold in there once, just take out the bulk of it and let the springtails clean up a little bit. If it's just a little bit, just let the springtails do their thing. That would be what I would say. But if it's excessively fuzzy, go ahead and take it out. It's going to be better in the long run. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and check out my next video on Friday.